Our next two scriptures are from Psalm 24 and Isaiah 24. Psalm 24 begins with these words, "The earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world, and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers." Isaiah 24 describes a darker picture. "Now the Lord is about to lay waste the earth and make it desolate, and he will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the slave, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. The earth shall be utterly laid waste and utterly despoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth dries up and withers, the world languishes and withers. The heavens languish together with the earth. The earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth dwindled, and few people are left. The wine dries up, the vine languishes, all the merry-hearted sigh. The mirth of the timbrels is stilled, the noise of the jubilant has ceased. The mirth of the lyre is stilled. No longer do they drink wine with singing. Strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. The city of chaos is broken down. Every house is shut up so that no one can enter. There is an outcry in the streets for lack of wine. All joy has reached its eventide. The gladness of the earth is banished. Desolation is left in the city. The gates are battered into ruins. For thus it shall be on the earth and among the nations, as when an olive tree is beaten, as at the gleaning, when the grape harvest is ended." Aren't you glad you came to church today? These words of universal judgment on the earth in Isaiah 24 are pretty depressing. Can we agree on that? They describe a time when human beings and the earth itself will suffer terribly, and no one will be able to escape the consequences of what comes on the earth, no matter how rich or poor, powerful or powerless someone might be. Isaiah describes a people who have broken the covenant established between God and people. And part of that covenant is obeying God's laws and caring for God's creation, as told to Adam and Eve, and as told to Noah and his family after the flood. God's judgment in the Bible and in real life even now is usually to allow people to suffer the results of their choices. In Isaiah's case, to suffer the results of polluting and abusing God's world and God's creatures. And the pollution and the desolation that Isaiah describes are sadly very relevant when we look at the world today. I want to ask you a question, just for you to reflect on. You don't have to shout out your answer. But what has most shaped your view of the earth? What has most shaped your view of the earth and all the creatures, life, and natural resources it contains? What people, what experiences, what teaching, what beliefs help to form the view that you currently hold? Because people have very different views of creation, from the utilitarian, which is strictly what can I get out of it to benefit myself, to a view of creation as sacred and as a means of revealing the reality, the beauty, and the character of God as communicated also in the Scriptures. I wonder how many of us have had our view of creation primarily shaped by the Bible and by passages like the ones we've heard today from Genesis 1 and John 1, from Psalm 24 and Isaiah 24. I learned when I was a very, very young child the biblical view that the earth is the Lord's, that it is to be treated well, with great care, and with the understanding that it does not belong to us. We belong to it for a very brief period of time, and then we pass it on to the next generation, hopefully better than we found it. My understanding was also shaped by my mother, who was always pointing out to us birds and animals and flowers and trees, the sunlight, the changing of the seasons, the sky, the moon, the stars, whales, you name it. Any of you have someone like that in your life when you were growing up? On television, we would watch the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Any of you remember watching that? I'm dating myself, but I'm talking about when I was a little kid. And for the time, it had incredible underwater photography, and Jacques Cousteau stressed the importance of conservation. We also watched Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom with Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler. And I always thought it was funny as a little kid that Marlon Perkins had his name in the title, like he was the big star. And he just sat there comfortably in a studio behind a desk. Meanwhile, here's Jim wrestling a water buffalo. You know, it was this kind of crazy thing, but it obviously really made an impression on me. And that always cracked me up. But all those kinds of experiences when I was a child really impacted my view of the earth, as did my first job, which I've told you about before, when I was 10 years old, when I was given a broomstick with a nail in it and a bag, and I walked the streets of Ocean Park, Maine, picking up garbage. Talk about something that'll shape your worldview. Yesterday, we had 18 people from church out picking up litter in town, as well as representatives of our Boy Scout troop who are out on the beach. Our small group covered Underpass Road, and I have to say, if you ever do this, it will not make you feel kindly towards those who throw cigarette butts and nip bottles on the ground. Try it sometime. I was saying to David Wilcock, we need to start a marketing campaign, something like no butts about it, or something. We've got to stop it. And after picking up trash, we all came back here to the church where the town put on a lunch for everyone who helped. And Jill and I were sitting with Emily Sumner and Donna Kalanick. And Donna is the assistant town administrator for the town of Brewster. And as we were talking about all this stuff, and I was sharing that I was going to be preaching about this today, and I was asking people at the table, what shaped your view of creation and caring for it? And Donna mentioned what I think is probably one of the most effective TV commercials of all time, which was the one of the Native American with the tear running down his face, looking at a littered and polluted landscape. And anyone my age or older remembers that commercial. And it was so impactful about it. Part of why I have such strongly negative feelings about litter and trashing and abusing God's world. So I've said a lot of negative stuff. Let's touch on the beauty of creation for a moment so you can feel better. Because as you drive around, I was taking pictures of the forsythia and the daffodils, and we're all excited about the tulips and all the stuff that's coming out. And it's not just all the things you see, it's also the cool sounds in nature. And one of the things I always look forward to in the spring is the passing through of large flocks of grackles. If you know what grackles are, they are kind of blackbirds. They have iridescent, sort of bluish heads. They often travel with blackbirds and red-winged blackbirds. But they come, and they're really noisy. And it's like a big Italian family kind of coming into your yard and your trees, and they're just, and I just love that. And it's like part of the seasonal nature of the Cape. They come in the spring, and there's like this 1 week where they're up in the trees, they're all over your yard, and then you don't see them as much. And then in the fall, it happens again. And I love it. It's like a family reunion going on in your yard. I love the sound of what Jill and I call the peepers around the corner from the church here. You leave a church meeting at night, as some of us do, and we'll slow down and put our windows down just so we can hear them. It's just so awesome. So, and there's another sound that's coming, which I always love every spring. And you know what that is? It's the sound of the wind in the leaves. Something that, we hear. I always, like in October, you get to, when you hear the wind in the leaves, this is near the end. We're not going to hear this sound again for like 6 months or so. And so when the leaves finally come out on the trees, as they will in like the next 10 days, and then you have that first day where you hear the wind in the leaves, to me it's just cool. If we listen closely in life, we might be surprised by what we hear. The Bible's teaching is crystal clear that God is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that life itself, all life itself, is a gift from God. As Psalm 24 asserts, the earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. From the story of creation in Genesis chapter 1 to so many of the Psalms, including Psalm 8, Psalm 29, Psalm 19, Psalm 104, Psalm 139, to passages like the prologue to John's Gospel and passages in Romans and Ephesians and Colossians, they all make it clear. The earth is the Lord's. The earth is the Lord's. We are God's people. We're the sheep of God's pasture. We are to be caretakers, stewards, gardeners, if you will, for God. Humanity is placed at the center of the garden in Genesis chapter 1. We're placed in the creation to care for it. We don't own the world, but as God's caretakers, we are to manage it and oversee it as God would. It's very unfortunate that caring for creation is something that Christians in the church just haven't done as well as we should. And because of our view as God as the creator and the earth belonging to the Lord, we have a biblical mandate that too often has frankly just been ignored. For Christians, caring for creation is not a political issue. It's not a conservative or a liberal issue. It's not an economics versus the environment issue. It's very simply just about obeying biblical teaching. The American Baptists came out with a statement about caring for creation more than 30 years ago. It's not something that's new. Even the Southern Baptists, who aren't known as kind of cutting-edge social sorts of things, even the Southern Baptists have come out with a 4-part statement about caring for creation, for the earth and its people and creatures and resources responsibly. The end of their statement says, we realize that simply affirming our God-given responsibility to care for the earth will likely produce no tangible or effective results. Therefore, we pledge to find ways to curb ecological degradation through promoting biblical stewardship habits and increasing awareness in our homes, in businesses where we have influence, relationships with others, and in our local churches. Many of our churches do not actively preach, promote, or practice biblical creation care. We urge churches to begin doing so. From the American Baptists to the Southern Baptists, from more liberal groups to the Evangelical Environmental Network, more and more denominations and churches are recognizing we have a faith-based obligation and moral responsibility to care for creation. And failing to care for creation is often a reflection of greed, ignorance, selfishness, apathy, or indifference. Humanity is worshipped for too long at the altar of consumption and convenience, and every other living thing and the earth itself has suffered as a result. The images and imagery of Isaiah 24 are visible in many places around the world today because of our irresponsibility as creatures harming God's creation. The creation that God made is the golden goose, if you will, that has allowed life to flourish, and yet we are killing the golden goose. When human beings break the covenant that God made with us to care for God's good creation, we all suffer, some more than others, some sooner than others. The church confesses that God is the maker of heaven and earth and of all things within them. And this conviction has great implications for the way we view the world around us. We care for the world. We see beauty in it. We recognize God's glory expressed in it. We aim to protect it, and we grieve when it is abused and damaged. The church also confesses that God has created all human beings in God's image. Regardless of where someone is born, the color of their skin, how young or old, strong or weak they are, we all carry the stamp of God's image as moral, ethical, and spiritual beings called into a unique relationship with our Creator. And this conviction leads us to view each and every human being as having God-given dignity and being worthy of respect and care and honor. I'm old now, so I like listening to music that came out in the 80s, and which is really funny because like when I was a kid and when I was young, I liked listening to music in the 50s, and I thought it was so old. But I actually listening to music from the 80s, that's a greater distance than when I listened to 50s music in the 70s. But anyway, one of my favorite groups from the 80s is a group called Huey, Lewis and the News. Some of you would remember them. Some of you may have seen them at the Melody Tent. And one of their songs is Small World, and it's not the It's a Small World that you hear at Disney World. But in Huey Lewis' song, Small World, it says, "Now we can fight one another like they do on TV, or we can help one another the way it's supposed to be. If we all give a little, it could really mean a lot. It's a small, small world, but it's the only one we've got." If you want to think more selfishly about why you need to care for creation, consider the sign in the window of the Chatham Candy Manor. You know the sign? You all know the Chatham Candy Manor, right? I would be on their marketing team. I mean, their stuff is great. They have a sign in their front window, and it says very simply, "Save the Earth. It's our only source of chocolate." Any intelligent and reasonable person can see that the way human beings have been living and using the earth, the oceans, the air, and water is not sustainable. We are fishing the seas empty of life and filling them with plastic and garbage. We are cutting down the rainforests and lesser forests that are the lungs of the planet. It's urgent that Christians and the church around the world become passionately involved in fulfilling our God-given task to be responsible caretakers of God's good creation before it's too late. When Jill and I go to Maine, like we did for 48 hours earlier this week, it was a long trip, but it was nice to get away. We always, and if you go to Maine, you want to get Smiling Hills Farm milk. You can get it at Hannaford's when you go up. Smiling Hill Farms milk is the best milk in the world. And it comes from a farm that's been in the same family since 1720. Okay? The Knight family has had this farm since 1720. And they share the following on their website about their farm in Maine. It says, "As our ancestors carried out the work of the seasons, they were keenly aware of the connection between humans, animals, and the environment. Whether cutting hay, putting up garden preserves, stacking firewood, cutting ice, tapping trees, or sowing seeds, it wasn't radical to be thoughtful about the environment. It was common sense. Today, Smiling Hill Farm continues to work in a way that is sensitive to the environment. We bottle our milk in reusable glass bottles, collect whey from our cheese to feed pigs, refuse to apply chemical fertilizers to our fields, and are actively exploring alternative forms of energy. Each action we take impacts the environment not only for our lifetime, but for the lifetime of our children and grandchildren. We pride ourselves on the care we take to minimize our impact on the environment and to contribute to its stability and diversity, preserving an agricultural way of life for the next generation to experience and enjoy. You know, in the days when life was more rural, when a greater percentage of our population lived on farms and in rural environments, there was a sense of taking care of the family farm because your hope was you'd be passing it on to your children. So you were managing the land and its resources, not just for yourself, but for future generations. We need to have that kind of perspective for the entire earth, that we are managing it not just for ourselves, but for future generations. As has been said, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. We want to leave them, and if you have kids with you, and even if you don't, just think of your own kids and your own grandchildren. We want to leave them a healthy, beautiful place to live, better than we found it. And for that to happen, significant changes need to be made. We need to stop having a utilitarian, extractive view of the earth and regain a biblical view of the sacredness and goodness of what God has made and entrusted to us, and to take up our role as caretakers and stewards of God's earth and all its creatures. The earth is the Lord's. Either we